You've seen it in films. Roman soldiers gleaming in polished armor, scarlet capes flowing in the wind. But here's the truth. Most legionaries never looked like that. Their real gear was practical, battered, and often far less glamorous than Hollywood dares to admit. The image of the Roman soldier is one of the most enduring in popular imagination. When you close your eyes, you probably see shining metal armor, scarlet cloaks whipping behind, disciplined ranks marching in perfect unison. It feels almost timeless, almost cinematic. Yet this picture is more a construction of art and film than it is a record of reality. For centuries, statues, mosaics, and Hollywood sets have polished away the rough edges of truth. What we inherited is an idealized soldier, a vision of order and perfection, not the flesh and blood man who lived in dirt, sweat, and weariness. The real Roman soldier did not live inside a marble carving or a Hollywood battlefield. He lived inside wool tunics that scratched his skin, boots that blistered his feet, and armor that pinched, bent, and bruised. He was equipped not for spectacle, but for survival. The empire stretched across a vast and hostile world. Icy rivers of Germania, the burning deserts of Syria, the damp fog of Britain, the endless plains of Dacia. In such extremes, no single uniform could exist. Each legionary adapted, layered, and improvised. One soldier shivered under extra cloth beneath his armor. Another stripped down to cope with the heat. The myth is uniformity. The truth is variation. In theory, Rome promised standardization. Every soldier, every kit, every shield cut from the same mold. In practice, supply chains faltered. Local workshops filled the gaps. Leather straps were cut wider or thinner. Helmets hammered with local designs. A cloak dyed with whatever pigment was available. The empire may have prided itself on order, but its armies wore the evidence of chaos. Think for a moment about what a soldier's gear represented. To him, it wasn't a costume of glory. It wasn't meant to inspire awe in the crowd. It was weight. It was sweat. It was the line between life and death. Every dent in a helmet told a story. Every frayed strap whispered of miles walked and nights endured. These details rarely survive in museum cases, but they were the constant companions of the men who carried them. Consider the cloak, the sagum. In paintings, it becomes a symbol, a splash of red against bronze. In reality, it was heavy, scratchy, rain-soaked. It smelled of smoke, mud, and unwashed bodies. Soldiers slept in it, marched in it, bled in it. No polished artist's brush could capture the raw truth of such a garment. And this is the great gap between myth and reality. The gap between what we want to remember and what men actually endured. For the average legionary, war was not a moment frozen in dramatic pose. It was the endless grind of routine. He repaired his gear with crude stitches. He shared sandals, swapped helmets, scavenged from fallen comrades. His uniform was always in flux, always patched, always scarred. The shining legion, you imagine, that existed only in Rome's public festivals, in parades meant to inspire awe. The battlefield was far less uniform, far less clean. And yet these ordinary, practical, sometimes battered soldiers formed the core of Rome's power. They did not look like gods. They looked like men, tired, scarred, layered in wool and iron. But in their endurance, in their ability to march thousands of miles in armor that chafed and sandals that cut, they became more formidable than any cinematic version could suggest. So when we begin to peel away the myths, we are left not with disappointment but with something more human. The Roman soldier was not the flawless figure of legend. He was a worker of empire, clothed in necessity, bearing the weight of routine. And this reality, less glamorous, more brutal, is the one that truly built Rome. The helmet was more than just protection. It was the soldier's closest companion in war, a piece of gear that pressed against his skin day after day, shaping not only how he looked, but how he felt. The famous Roman galea came in countless forms, bronze, iron, some adorned, most plain. No two helmets were exactly alike. Some bore ridges, others smooth curves, cheek guards that hugged the face or wide brims that shaded the eyes. What the movies rarely show is how uncomfortable these helmets could be. The iron dug into the skin. Sweat pooled beneath the padding. Straps rubbed the jaw raw. Soldiers often lined the inside with cloth or wool, desperate to soften the bite of metal against bone. The vision of every Roman soldier crowned with a dramatic red plume belongs more to parades and pageantry than to real battlefields. Yes, officers sometimes wore crests, and centurions were known for tall horsehair plumes that marked their authority. But for the ordinary legionary, the plume was a liability. It caught the wind, it made him stand out, it tangled and frayed. On campaign, soldiers stripped their helmets of anything unnecessary. What mattered was sight, breath, mobility. A man wanted to hear the order of his officer, the footsteps of his comrades, the rustle of danger in the dark. A helmet that obstructed vision or dulled sound was a hazard, not a badge of pride. Imagine the monotony of it. Every dawn lifting the helmet, setting it firmly on the skull, buckling the strap tight. The same pressure against the forehead, the same pinch of the cheek guards, the same musty smell of sweat-soaked padding. Battle was rare. Marching was constant, which meant helmets were worn longer for endurance than for combat. Over months and years, they became part of the soldier's very identity, shaping how he carried himself, how he was recognized among his peers. And the helmet, though practical, also carried a silent weight. It was a reminder that his head was always under threat. A dent here, a scratch there. These marks told of close calls, of moments when the thin shell of iron stood between life and oblivion. Every soldier knew someone whose helmet had split, whose skull had cracked despite the protection. Wearing it was both comfort and warning. What's striking is the variety that existed across Rome's armies. A legion in Germania might wear locally forged helmets, thicker, heavier, built to withstand crushing blows from northern tribes. In the east, lighter helmets allowed for speed in desert heat. Some designs mimicked Greek styles, others borrowed from Gallic smiths. Rome did not invent every piece of equipment. It absorbed, adapted, and repurposed what worked. The helmet was not a static symbol of Rome, but a living record of conquest and assimilation. And yet, despite these variations, the helmet always meant the same thing to the man beneath it. It was the boundary between his thoughts and the violence outside. Slip it on, and he ceased to be a farmer's son or a homesick youth from some distant province. He became a cog in Rome's war machine. The helmet erased individuality. 100 men in helmets looked like a single wall of iron. To the soldier himself, that anonymity could be suffocating. He was not himself anymore. He was Rome. Think of the silence inside, the muffled sounds, the way your own breath echoed back. For hours, sometimes days, the soldier lived in that echo, carrying not just the weight of metal, but the reminder that he was trapped inside the empire's armor, as surely as he was trapped inside its discipline. The helmets of Rome were not polished ornaments from a film set. They were battered, practical, dented, and often uncomfortable. They were stitched with wool, smeared with grease, and carried the sweat of endless marches. They did their job, they kept men alive. But they also whispered to those men every day that they belonged to something larger, heavier, and more demanding than themselves. And for many, that whisper was both comfort and curse. When most people imagine a Roman soldier, one piece of armor stands out above all others: the lorica segmentata. Those strips of overlapping iron plates gleaming under the sun, locked into place with leather straps and buckles. It has become the armor of legend. Museums and movie sets love to display it. Artists sketch it. Reenactors wear it proudly. But here's the truth. The segmentata was not the standard across Rome's armies. It was rare, temporary, and far less practical than you might think. For most of Rome's history, soldiers wore chainmail, known as the lorica hamata. This was a shirt of interlocking iron rings, flexible, durable, and easier to repair on the move. A broken link could be replaced. A torn section could be patched. Many soldiers wore the same mail shirt for years, passing it on, repairing it until it sagged under its own weight. It was heavy, yes, but it was reliable. The segmentata was something else entirely. It appeared in certain centuries, mostly during the height of the empire, and not every legion had access to it. It was expensive to manufacture and, more importantly, difficult to maintain. The plates rusted quickly in wet climates. The leather straps and fittings snapped under strain. A soldier who owned one needed constant supplies and skilled armorers to keep it functional. On long campaigns far from Rome's heartland, it became a burden rather than a blessing. That's why so many legions stuck with chainmail or scale armor instead. Scale armor, the lorica squamata, was another common sight. Made of hundreds of small overlapping plates sewn to a backing of cloth or leather. It shimmered in the sun like the skin of a fish. It looked impressive. It offered decent protection. But it had weaknesses too. Once pierced, it tore easily. Dust and sand wore it down. Still, it was cheaper to produce than segmentata and more readily supplied. What does this tell us? That the famous image of endless ranks of soldiers all in identical segmentata is a myth. The Roman army was not a parade ground. It was a living, breathing, moving organism stretched across thousands of miles. Some men wore chainmail. Some wore scale. A few wore plate. Many combined whatever they could acquire. Standardization was the empire's dream, not its reality. Imagine being a soldier in the field. Your armor is not a shining symbol of Rome. It is an object you struggle with daily. Chainmail grows heavier as it gets wet. Scale armor pinches and bends. Segmentata digs into the shoulders and rusts at the joints. Armor wasn't glory, it was discomfort. And yet it was necessary. You endured the weight because without it you were vulnerable. Think of the routine. Buckling the straps every morning. Checking the links for rust. Oil rubbed into iron to slow decay. Repairs done by lamplight in the camp. This was the soldier's real relationship with his armor. Not pride, maintenance, labor, frustration, day after day, week after week. And there is something almost poetic in that. The empire is remembered for its shining perfection, but in truth it relied on imperfection. On patched chainmail, on cracked scales, on plates bound with makeshift leather ties. Soldiers fought not in flawless armor, but in battered gear that bore the marks of every march, every rainstorm, every blow. So the next time you picture the Roman soldier, do not imagine an endless sea of identical iron plates. Imagine instead a patchwork army, each man in armor that told his own story, some gleaming, some rusted, some tight and new, others patched and sagging. The myth is uniformity. The reality is survival. Beneath the iron, beneath the shields and weapons, lay the soldier's true uniform. Simple wool and leather, practical, coarse, and often uncomfortable. The tunic was the foundation. Short-sleeved, usually knee-length, woven from rough wool that scratched the skin and absorbed every ounce of sweat. Movies always paint them as crimson red, but in truth, color depended on supply. Some were reddish, some brown. Some faded into pale earth tones after countless washings in rivers and streams. There was no single Roman red. There was only what was available. Over that tunic came the cloak, the sagum. This was no flowing cape of a general. It was a thick rectangle of wool, pinned at the shoulder, heavy and stiff. The soldier wore it not to impress, but because he had no choice. The cloak was his coat, his blanket, his shield against rain and cold. In the damp fields of northern Europe, it grew waterlogged and smelled of mildew. In the scorching provinces, it trapped sweat and dust. Soldiers slept wrapped in it, marched wrapped in it, even died wrapped in it. It was less a garment and more a second skin, one that rarely left the body. And then there were the feet, the foundation of the legion. Roman soldiers wore caligae, open-work sandals with thick soles studded with hobnails. At first glance, they looked primitive, but the nails gripped the earth and made the sandals durable across hundreds of miles. They were clever, yes, but they were also brutal. The hard soles offered little cushion. After long marches, feet blistered, bled, and cracked. To cope, soldiers stuffed wool into the gaps, wrapped cloth around their toes, or carried spare pairs to rotate. Yet still the march went on. Always the march. This is where the real battle lay. Not in the clash of swords, but in the monotony of routine. Day after day, men carried heavy packs, their cloaks dragging in the mud, their sandals biting into raw skin. They sweated through wool tunics that never fully dried, smelled of smoke from campfires, stiffened with salt from endless perspiration. And all of this before a single arrow was fired. Think of the repetition. Wake, strap on sandals, sling the cloak, adjust the tunic, march, stop, march again. The miles rolled beneath their feet, but the gear remained constant. Cloaks rubbed the shoulders raw, sandals tore skin, wool itched, and still the line of men kept moving, kept carrying Rome on their backs. The enemy was not only the tribes at the border, it was the weight of the daily grind. Clothing told another story too. Improvisation. A soldier in the cold north might stitch extra cloth inside his tunic, or wear two cloaks layered together. In the east, men cut their tunics shorter, lighter, sometimes bleached pale to resist the heat. Supplies were issued, yes, but adaptation was survival. The army depended on men making do, patching old cloth, reusing scraps, sewing repairs by the fire. Rome's strength lay not in endless uniformity, but in endless endurance. What the modern eye often misses is that this gear, plain as it was precious. A tunic represented warmth, a cloak represented sleep. A pair of sandals could mean the difference between keeping up with the march or collapsing on the road. Soldiers treasured these items, cursed them, repaired them, and relied on them. They were not glamorous. They were not symbols. They were lifelines. And so while marble statues freeze soldiers in perfect armor, the real men trudged through mud and scratchy wool, hobnailed sandals pounding stone roads, cloaks dragging at their shoulders. They were not dressed for glory. They were dressed for survival. And in that survival, Rome expanded one blistered step at a time. The Roman soldiers' tools of war have become legendary. The gladius, short and sharp. The pilum, the heavy throwing spear. The scutum, the great curved shield. But for the men who carried them, these objects were not emblems of glory. They were weight. They were labor. They were the constant burdens of daily life. The gladius is often imagined as a heroic weapon, a blade that conquered the world. In reality, it was simple. A short sword about 2 feet long, double-edged with a sharp point. Perfect for thrusting in close quarters, but hardly glamorous. Soldiers did not stare at their swords in awe. They sharpened them on whetstones, rubbed oil into the steel to keep off rust, checked the hilt for cracks. It was a tool, no different than a farmer's plow or a carpenter's chisel. And like any tool, it wore down. The edge dulled, the point bent, the grip loosened. Repairs were constant. Then came the pilum. Every soldier carried at least one. Long wooden shafts tipped with soft iron, designed to pierce shields, then bend so they could not be thrown back. Brilliant in concept, frustrating in practice. The shafts snapped, the tips bent before battle even began. Rain soaked the wood and made them heavy. Soldiers had to carry replacements, haul them over miles, adjust their packs to fit. The pilum wasn't a symbol, it was a burden. And yet, in the moment of need, it did its job. Shields collapsed under its weight. Enemy lines broke. The soldier threw and then drew his sword. But the greatest weight of all was the scutum. Large, rectangular, curved around the body, bound with leather and edged with metal. It was Rome's true fortress, the foundation of discipline and formation. In the testudo, shields overlapped, becoming a wall of wood and iron. From the outside, it looked impenetrable, unstoppable. From the inside, it was suffocating. A soldier's shield could weigh as much as 10 kilograms. Straps dug into his forearm. The curve pressed against his shoulder. In battle, it became part of him, but in the march, it was punishment. Carried hour after hour, it left muscles trembling, skin rubbed raw, shields cracked in the rain, splintered under blows, leather peeled away. Each required repair. Each was patched with whatever materials were at hand. The paint that once decorated them, symbols of legion, of pride, quickly chipped, faded, and disappeared. What remained was function, nothing more. Imagine the monotony. Every morning, lift the shield, adjust the strap, feel the weight settle into the bones. March, stop, march again. At camp, check for cracks, apply resin or pitch, bind with new leather. The routine never ended. And yet this shield was life. It was protection against arrows, against spears, against blades. The soldier cursed it, but he clung to it all the same. Weapons and shields are often remembered as symbols of Rome's power, but to the soldier they were reminders of his fragility. A sword too dull meant death. A spear shaft too soft meant failure. A shield too heavy meant collapse on the march. The tools did not just serve Rome, they demanded constant service in return. And this is where the myth diverges from the truth. In stories, the sword is glorious, the spear brilliant, the shield invincible. In reality, they were heavy, awkward, fragile at times. They broke. They faltered. They demanded endless maintenance. Soldiers lived not in a haze of glory, but in the grind of upkeep. Theirs was not a life of shining weapons, but of sharpening stones, of oiled cloths, of patched wood. And yet these tools, battered and plain, built an empire. Not because they were perfect, but because men carried them every day, through mud, through snow, through endless miles. They carried them until their arms ached, their shoulders burned, their spirits cracked, and still they carried on. The horn sounds, low, hollow, a call into the darkness. One man stirs, then another. They rise from thin blankets, from dreams of home, from aching limbs that never truly rest. Gear waits, always waiting. Helmet, cloak, shield, sword. The ritual is mechanical now. Straps pulled tight in the dark. Leather creaks. Wool brushes against damp skin. Iron settles on tired shoulders. The soldier steps into blackness. His breath hangs white in the air. The fire at camp's edge glows faint. Little warmth reaching his bones. The guard line forms silent. Each man takes his place. The shift begins. Hours stretch. Time moves differently now. Not in minutes, not in seconds. In shuffles of feet. In glances into the void. In the ache of the spine from standing still too long. Darkness presses. Eyes strain. Every flicker feels like movement. Every whisper of wind like footsteps. The mind begins to conjure threats where none exist. Shapes crawl in the corners of vision. Shadows swell, then vanish. The soldier blinks, shakes his head, tightens his grip on the shield. Nothing. Always nothing. And yet that nothing is heavy. It weighs more than battle. No roar of combat. No clash of blades. Just silence. Endless silence. And the knowledge that at any moment it could break. The watch is not glorious. It is not remembered in songs. But it is constant. The Empire survives not only through battles won, but through nights endured. Thousands upon thousands of nights. Ordinary men standing guard while the rest of the world sleeps. Feet shuffle. Sandals grind dirt. A cough breaks the stillness. A muttered prayer, quickly swallowed. Men are not supposed to speak. The silence must hold, and so it does. Hour after hour, fatigue gnaws. The body begs for rest. Eyelids droop. The head tilts forward. A jolt of panic snaps the soldier upright. He cannot sleep. To sleep is to risk the camp. To sleep is to invite punishment. The centurion's wrath is often worse than any enemy's blade. He paces now. A few steps forward. A few steps back. The rhythm keeps him awake. Sword clinks against scabbard. Shield scrapes against cloak. He repeats the motion. Again, again, again. The monotony is crushing, but monotony is survival. In the distance, an owl calls. The cry echoes, thin and lonely. The soldier listens hard. Was it only a bird? Or something else? He cannot know. The night is a world of half-truths. Of sounds without shapes. Of fears without faces. He grips his sword hilt tighter. Knuckles whiten. Breath quickens. But nothing comes. Just silence again. Silence stretching wider than the horizon. The shift crawls forward. One man relieves another. The line rotates, but the feeling does not change. Time has no meaning here, only the weight of waiting. This is the soldier's reality. Not the clash of great battles, not the roar of glory, but the endless grinding watch. Each night a battle with himself, against fatigue, against fear, against the crushing monotony that dulls the senses and breaks the will. The true enemy is not out there, in the dark woods or the barren hills. The true enemy is routine, and routine never sleeps. The night ends. The guard shifts. The sun climbs. Another day begins. And with it, the same motions, the same burdens, the same weight of routine. This is the soldier's war, not only fought with blades and shields, but with patience, with endurance, with the unyielding demand of repetition. When we imagine the legions, it is easy to picture lines of shining helmets, crimson cloaks fluttering, a storm of spears pressing forward. That vision is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because behind every battlefield moment lies the long, unbroken stretch of days and nights where nothing happens. And yet everything is demanded. The Roman soldier was defined not just by what he wore, but by how long he wore it. The iron helmet pressing against his brow. The woolen cloak wrapping him against damp winds. The leather straps chafing his shoulders after hours of march. None of these things were temporary. They were constant companions. A second skin that separated him from rest, from ease, from the softness of civilian life. In truth, the greatest victories of the Roman army were not secured on the battlefield. They were secured in the relentless discipline of daily life, in soldiers rising when the horn called, no matter how tired, no matter how cold. In camps built every night, broken every morning, rebuilt again by hands that knew no rest. In watches kept while the world slept, while silence pressed heavier than any shield. What then is the reality of what Roman soldiers truly wore in war? They wore armor, yes. Helmets, shields, swords. But they also wore fatigue. They wore hunger. They wore the scars of endless marching. They wore the loneliness of being far from home. The ache of missing voices never heard again. The longing for fields they would never plow and children they would never raise. And through all of this they endured. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Because the machine of empire demanded it. Because Rome did not stand on stone alone. It stood on the shoulders of men who bore its weight without relief. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them. The tramp of countless feet. The creak of leather. The clink of iron. Not in one battle, not in one city, but across centuries, across continents, repeating without end. The rhythm of an empire played out in human endurance. So when you think of the Roman legionary, remember not only the shining image carved on monuments or painted in later centuries. Remember the man beneath. The man who woke before dawn, whose body ached from armor worn too long, whose cloak stank of sweat and rain, whose sandals rubbed his feet raw. Remember the monotony that shaped him as much as any battle. Remember that war is not only won in moments of glory, but in the quiet hours no one sees. And perhaps ask yourself, if you had stood in his place with the same gear on your shoulders, with the same endless days stretched before you, would you have endured? The Roman soldier did, and for that, the empire lasted. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.